All right. Hey, everybody.
Greetings. Great. And for everyone who's on, we're just going to wait a few more minutes till folks get signed in. All right, Robert, I think we're ready to go.
Sure. Welcome. If this is your first time joining us, everyone will remain muted throughout the meeting, except the committee co-chairs Sarah and Sandrea and the presenters. Following the presentation, co-chairs will call members of the public wishing to speak. You can participate by going to the reactions icon, pressing raise hand, not the wave or the thumbs up. Only press it once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you're on the phone, it is *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. Please be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once the co-chairs call on you. The chat is for technical support only. To help with Zoom software problems, not to ask questions of the co-chairs. They will not see these chats. If you have an older version of Zoom, you need to go to the participants section where you will find the raise hand feature there. Please do not raise your actual hand or wave at the screen because we may not be able to see you. Chat me. I'm here for support. Sarah, Sandrea, back to you.
Thank you, Robert. All righty, everybody. We're excited today to have Damien Fagan he's the Chief Equity Officer at the Office of Cannabis Management in New York State. And Mr. Fagan is a third-generation farmer. He has a background in international development and agriculture. So he supported castor farmers in Jamaica, rice growers in Sierra Leone, and coffee exporters in Guatemala. Prior to that, he was with the Peace Corps and worked for the Department of Justice. So he really is someone who has had a range of experience. And since 2017, he's launched and advised commercial cannabis operations in South Carolina, New York, and in the Caribbean. And so today, I'd really like to focus our discussion on the equity and the justice reinvestment portion of the office's work. That's a portion of the bill that I think was so important when it went through, and I think it's unique in New York. That I don't think that this same type of equity work has been integrated into other state statutes that legalized cannabis across the U.S. And we've had other Community Board 8 meetings that focused on the regulatory framework of this office's work. And I asked Mr. Fagan if he could cover some aspects of that, so it wouldn't be hanging over the discussion. But I hope that together we'd understand that in the course of our discussion that we would be, of course, regulation will come up, but that if we could focus our questions and comments on the intersections between regulation and the justice reinvestment work. We're incredibly lucky to have Mr. Fagan here today. He's available for about an hour, so about a 15-minute presentation, and then 45 minutes of Q&A. we really want to get him out on time. And so before we turn it over to Mr. Fagan, I'm going to throw it over to Sandrea for any comments that you may want to open us up with.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, co-chair extraordinaire. We're grateful to have you here. Thank you for coming to present. This has been a long time coming, so we're glad to have you finally here with us. And so people can learn about the office, the work, and the harms that have, plagued the people. And hopefully some people can, if they're not here tonight, they can watch our YouTube channel and learn how, it could benefit them now since they've been harmed from it. And now they can possibly get licensing or whatever they need for that. So thank you. And Sarah, back to you.
Great. And Mr. Fagan, we'll turn it over to you. And I think you're going to need sharing capacity too.
So I have a partner, someone from the office here. Philip Rumsey is, I think he's here.
Yes, I'm on, Damien.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Bill's going to kick us off and then I will jump in.
Yeah, and real quick, just to circle back, when Pascal Bernard and I were putting this together, we were asked if we could cover MRTA, the basics of the law, licenses, enforcement, regulations, and equity. So I was thinking I could handle the first part, maybe 10 minutes or so, or less, and I can turn it over to Damien at the end, who will focus on social equity aspect of things. So I will kick things off now, if that's good. And yeah, I will do the first part and we will go from there. Let's see. Okay, everyone can see this all right?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So just want to start off with some of the basic aspects here. What is the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act? I will be referring to this as MRTA or MRTA. Basics here are the MRTA created the Office of Cannabis Management. It also created two boards. There's a Cannabis Control Board who will be in charge of distributing licenses. And there is a Cannabis Advisory Board who will help to come up with ways of distributing some of the tax revenue that we'll have. This really represented a shift from New York State, where public health is really the core. We like to call this the bar stool. The core here is public health, and the stools around it are social justice, economic development, and public safety is really where we're shifting the conversation. So opportunities in the cannabis industry. The MRTA, again, Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, has 9 license types. The two you're most familiar with are retail, dispensary, and on-site consumption. Those are certainly the ones that get most media attention. But there are 7 others that are within the MRTA. One flag I want to make here is that New York State has a tiered system, and we have the 4 tiers here. This was created so that no one individual or no one company, business could really take over the cannabis ecosystem we're trying to create here in New York State by, essentially becoming a minority member or have a lot of money and interest in different aspects of these tiers. So the first tier you can see are the growing, processing. We have a dispensary, on-site consumption, the retail tier, medical, and laboratories. And again, this is to make sure that we have as many individuals participating in the New York ecosystem as we can, and making sure that one individual does not take over the entire market. On a side note, I certainly want to mention there are a lot of ancillary businesses. The 9 license types I just showed you are the 9 license types where an individual will have to apply, and then the Cannabis Control Board would have to issue them a license. There's a lot more to the industry than just the 9 license types. There's a lot of ancillary businesses, the packaging and labeling, e-commerce website, hydroponics, payroll companies, real estate. All these ancillary businesses can participate in the greater cannabis ecosystem that we're creating here. However, they don't need to come to get a license from us for these ancillary businesses. Roles of the community boards. So the role of a community board or a municipality are to express an opinion on the applicant and the location. And these opinions can be expressed for dispensary and on-site consumption lounges. Municipalities and community boards, they do not have a role in expressing opinion in other license types such as cultivator or distributor. As I said, a community board, a municipality can comment directly on the on-site and retail dispensaries. The applicants or individuals who have applied do need to make sure that the Cannabis Control Board within their proposed location is notified. And we do have a notification to municipalities document that applicants would need to send to the community boards in order to make sure you know where they're going and timeframes. So retail guidance. I will be putting in the chat a link to this document. And just so everyone knows, I will be sending this PowerPoint over to the community board, along with any links that we use in chat or any additional links that I think will be helpful. So you will be getting all this information that we both refer to. This guidance document, it does a great job outlining what we need the card applicants to make sure they are fully aware of and are implementing properly. And again, this is a pretty big document. It is 30 pages. Once you read this document, you will have a full and robust understanding of the need we place on security, on signage, on making sure that we have a point of contact at these dispensaries. And you'll have a full, broad understanding of where they're going and what we make sure all licensees are in compliance with before they can open. So we put out regulations for the MRTA November 21st of last year. This outlined really the totality of the cannabis ecosystem that we are trying to create with the MRTA licenses. So it addresses the key social and economic equity programs, environmental and sustainability standards, packaging and labeling. They went out December 14th, and they were pulled back in after their initial 60-day comment period, February 13th of this year. Our legal team is currently reviewing them and looking at the comments that were made. These will be going out again for their 45-day comment period later on. And I do just want to flag, I know these dates are, in the past, but there's a reason that we want to show you this slide. When they go back out, individuals can take the time to look them over, and we want to hear from you. The regulations at ocm.ny.gov email is the best way for individuals to comment on the regulations. So again, we're going to be entering our second public comment period phase soon. Our lawyers are working around the clock to incorporate the different comments that were made. And we will certainly keep you apprised of when they go back out for an additional 45-day comment period. So OCM enforcement, this is a huge topic for us, for all municipalities, and certainly with the community boards we speak to. The MRTA gave OCM power over licensed businesses. And this is an important distinction. The illicit shops, the shops that you're seeing throughout New York City with the large neon signs and with product in the window, those are the illicit shops. They have not received permission to sell THC products from New York State or New York City, and they are doing this illegally. Since we only have power over licensed businesses, that does handicap us a bit. We have been working with local authorities and explaining how local law enforcement and DAs can move forward using nuisance and abatement laws and existing laws on the books. So the illicit sales, once we find out about these places, our enforcement division does begin looking into them, looking into the allegations, seeing what's going on at these sites. We have been working with different law enforcement at the local level to shut these places down. And as many as you see, you know, we understand this is a huge issue. We are doing everything we can to crack down on them using our existing law. Here's a couple of quick photos. Our enforcement team did flag if you have an illegal shop, do not put cannabis dispensary on the neon sign. It is a flag for us. This is just a quick photo of some of our enforcement team in action here. This is a before and after. Everything on the left side was a THC product. Everything on the right side, you know, that's the after picture. That is what we take from these stores. If you come across an illegal store, there are a couple ways you can report it. You can send an email to complaints@ocm.ny.gov. We ask if you can put in as much information as possible, name of the business, address, things like that. This kickstarts the our enforcement division's ability to start looking into this location and sending them cease and desist orders. If they ignore those, they can go in using the nuisance and abatement. We are in the process of working with the state legislative branch and executive branch on expanding our powers. When I said that we only have power over licensed entities, we are trying to expand that to cannabis itself. So we would therefore have more authority over these unlicensed entities, and we're looking to increase fines. I wish I could give you a bill number, but right now it's being worked on as we speak. So we will be following up with more information on that once it works its way through the bureaucratic process. What I will end with here, and to tee up Damien, is the conditional adult use licensing system. So you can see on the right side, I have already discussed the 9 MRTA licenses. And these were the licenses that were included in that November 21st regulations push that we made. I kind of want to shift your minds a little bit here and talk about an additional licensing system. This is the conditional system. It's a standalone system, and it's creating a micro cannabis ecosystem throughout New York State. There are 3 licenses here: the cultivator license, the growing, the processor license, which turns things from the plant into the different products, and then the one that you may have heard most about, the conditional adult use retail dispensary license, or CARD. So far, we've given about 280 cultivator or growing licenses. We've given out 40 processor and 66 conditional retail dispensary. The conditional system are the ones where the individual needed to have a previous cannabis related conviction or an eligible family member, and in addition to that, have owning and operating a qualified successful business as well. So the licenses you're currently hearing about that are opening up in New York City and other parts of the state are these conditional licensing licenses that we have right now. So these dispensaries that you're hearing about are the conditional ones. The MRTA ones are moving forward in those regulation packets that I had mentioned earlier. So with that teed up, we can move now to Damien's part here, and I will go on mute and go from there.
Thank you, Phil. And thank you everyone for having me tonight. I really do appreciate it. Thank you, Sarah, for setting this up. And so Andrea, like this is great. I think you may have mentioned to everybody that, you know, I've lived in this area for 4.5 years now, with my wife, who's been there for about 9-10 years. And we love it. And it's home for us and our dog. And so I understand, you know, I go into the illicit shops in the Upper East Side all the time and talk to them. And so like I have prioritized a lot of the shops that I've seen in our neighborhoods for enforcement action just because I have to walk by them and they really annoy me. And so I'm happy to call the Upper East Side home. I look forward to what a legal cannabis business looks like in this community. But what I want to do now, and you know, Phil really kind of set the stage for the larger conversation around what the equity program is going to look like and what these card conditional dispensaries might look like should they come to the Upper East Side. But I also want to leave plenty of time for questions. I have up until when did we start? We started at 6:30. Yeah, I have until 8 if you guys have a lot of questions, because I assume a lot of people do. Whenever we do community boards, there are questions. And so I'll stick around as long as you guys have questions. We can go to the next slide, Phil. So the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act is actually, you know, hands down the most progressive cannabis legalization bill in the country. So it is important to set that stage because no other state has gone as far as New York is intending to go in terms of equity and inclusion and local community development, real tangible community development, small business development, which you've seen in other states. And Jersey is a perfect example, legalized about a year before us. They have already done billions of dollars in cannabis revenue and sales since they legalized. But all that money has been made by about 6 or 7 corporations, publicly traded companies that, you know, don't really call New Jersey home. You know, they are large multi-state operators. That's one way of doing legalization. You know, New Jersey is trying now to incorporate equity into their industry. But what we have found looking at other states and how they've rolled out other markets is that if you don't start with equity, it's very hard to just add it on in the back end. And it sometimes looks more like a performative exercise than it does an actual substantive one. And so, you know, we reversed that in New York. This is the first time it's ever been done in the country where, you know, we're starting with equity licenses. We're starting with small farmers. Many of them are distressed farmers from the hemp program who lost a lot of money growing hemp. And justice impacted individuals, people who had marijuana related convictions or their loved ones were convicted of a marijuana related crime for the first retail licenses. So to talk about the bill itself, the MRTA, the cannabis law, the most progressive element of it is two-tiered. 50% of all the business licenses that the office hands out in perpetuity will go to social and economic equity applicants and business owners. So who are those social equity categories? The first category are individuals from communities disproportionately impacted. They receive the most priority. This is going to be essentially, you'll go to our website in June or July when we release a map. There will be a map that shows you where all the cannabis arrests, marijuana arrests, and convictions took place throughout New York State as in sort of a heat map, and it'll follow census tracts. And so you'll see, you know, where stop and frisk was very active in the city. You'll see a lot of, you know, heat in East Harlem, Washington Heights, the South Bronx, East Brooklyn. Individuals who lived in those communities who were over policed and over incarcerated for cannabis, if they submit, you know, their rent lease agreements where they were raised, where, you know, some tax returns, they can prove that they lived in these communities during a certain period of time and apply for these licenses and receive priority. The other categories are distressed farmers, so farmers who have had an operating loss over 3 years, basically losing money over a 3-year period, service disabled veterans, minority and women-owned businesses, and finally people with marijuana arrests. And so those are the broad buckets of categories that, you know, will receive 50% of the cannabis licenses industry wide. The other huge component is the revenue reinvestment. The next slide. Don't worry about it, Phil. You're muted. I got it. So the 50% licensing is one of the biggest progressive components of the bill. The second big component is 40% of the tax revenues generated through the sale of cannabis will be reinvested in those same communities that were disproportionately impacted. That money will go towards reentry services, scholarships, parks, infrastructure projects. You know, there's been some talk internally with my team looking at potentially paying off people's medical debt, helping people buy buy their apartments because so many of these individuals rent, and so helping them generate some wealth in their community. But that 40% number, I need to stress that is probably what was fought over the hardest in the signing of the cannabis law. What typically happens when states legalize cannabis is, state governments see, oh, revenue, that's new revenue. We need that new revenue. And usually what they like with that new revenue is to just put it into a general fund that the governor controls or the state legislature controls, and they just have for special projects. The fight during the MRTA was to ensure that money was allocated off the bat for those communities. So 40% of the tax revenue going to those communities, that's not nothing. That's potentially $400 million a year in grants and just money flowing into those communities when our markets mature. So the 50% licensing, the reinvestment money, my team internally as chief equity officer, I manage the equity team. I manage about 14 individuals now. Eventually we'll have a team of about 25 that handle the equity and economic development work across the state. We're doing everything around small business development, helping people who get these licenses actually run these businesses, training them, helping them be compliant. We are doing providing low interest loans, grants to help them get their businesses off the ground. We are developing the strategy by which we roll out these licenses, how we prioritize them. We'll do a lot of informational campaigns to actually teach them how to apply and find partners to help them apply. Part of my team's job, we actually are talking to law firms who may provide pro bono services to these licensees as well to help them structure their real estate deals and start their businesses. Lastly, the other element here is the Cannabis Advisory Board. These individuals, they've met a few times now. They are ultimately going to be the advisory board that decides how that $400 million is allocated. So essentially, someone from a community disproportionately impacted will develop a project or a proposal for a nonprofit, for a community organization. They will submit it to the Cannabis Advisory Board to get funded for consideration. That Cannabis Advisory Board will determine how these projects are funded, which ones go first, et cetera, et cetera. We can go to the next slide. One of the most important parts of the MRTA, as soon as it was signed into law, was expungement. 600,000 cannabis convictions across the state were immediately expunged. No one had to go see a judge or apply to have it expunged. The MRTA automatically removed these things from their record, which was incredibly important. And that's something that I talk about in our social and economic equity plan that we plan to release in about a month. There were a lot of economic consequences to a cannabis-related conviction. You couldn't get scholarships. A lot of kids got kicked out of college. You couldn't get housing subsidies. You sometimes got removed from your high school. You may not be able to see your children. You may have actually spent time in prison. The economic, you couldn't get jobs. There was a time period where people who were convicted of a felony or a misdemeanor, literally you could reject them for a job. And so we know from data that the result of a cannabis related misdemeanor conviction resulted in a reduction of 16% in lifetime earnings of that person. And if it was a felony conviction, it was 25% reduction in lifetime earnings. We've already calculated internally the cost economically of those 600 convictions across New York State. It's upwards of $40 billion in lost lifetime earnings over the course of their lives that they'll never get back. And so record expungement, community reinvestment, and equity in our cannabis marketplace is central to what New York is doing and how it's approaching legalization. Do we have another slide after this, Phil?
Yep.
There's the Cannabis Reinvestment Fund. So I already talked about the community grants reinvestment. That's 40% of the tax revenue. Where does the other 60% go? Well, 40% goes into public schools. So 40% of all the tax revenue will go into the fund to support schools across the state, and 20% will go into drug treatment and public education. So you can already see how progressive this bill really is. These are landmark provisions that haven't happened in other states. We're talking about making public education better in the state. We're talking about helping these communities get back on track after 40 years of prohibition. And we're going to help people with drug treatment and education around safe drug usage and substance abuse disorder issues as well. So holistically, looking at an industry that could potentially generate over $1 billion a year in tax revenue for the state, all of that is predetermined, in the law, going to these programs is not going into some general fund that we get to do whatever we want with. It's going into these programs. Next. So a little update on where we are with the rollout of the social and economic equity plan. So there's going to be a plan, a document, a policy proposal document that's going to be released by my team in our office in the coming month. I think at our May board meeting, our Cannabis Control Board meeting. This is something that people should definitely check out if they're interested in what it is we're going to be doing over the next few years. It will lay out the background research that went into all of our proposed programs, our summary recommendations, how we're prioritizing people, what we're going to do to help them, how the market might develop, in terms of economic development. An example of that that I like to use for people to understand is a lot of our cannabis law was modeled off of our liquor law. And so I think a lot of you might be familiar with wineries and craft breweries that are upstate. They're a big tourist draw, especially on Long Island. They bring in billions of dollars in revenue to the state, especially to rural environments without a lot of other opportunity or economic jobs and development. And so much like we have wineries and craft breweries in the Hudson Valley and in the Finger Lakes, and people go up there and go to bed and breakfasts and they stay and they visit these locations, we will have micro businesses. We have a micro business license for cannabis, where much like that, people will have a farm, they will have a greenhouse, and they will also be able to retail their products that they grow on their farm directly to the consumer right there, like a farm stand. And so we expect that to also bring billions of dollars in tourism money to the state, upstate as well. And so that's part of what you'll see in this social and economic equity plan as our economic development strategy for rolling out this industry. We really want to make sure that the benefits of legalization are geographically diverse and they aren't concentrated in New York City as they usually are. There will obviously be a ton of jobs and economic development that happens in the city. But for some of our rural populations, particularly those that have seen a lot of deindustrialization, a lot of lost manufacturing jobs, this also is a huge opportunity for them to capture some of that economic development as well. The other thing that will happen in this social and economic equity plan when we release it, we're actually going to show you a map of Manhattan that shows you where the cannabis arrest predominantly took place. I believe Manhattan was home to about 300 to 400,000 of those arrests, of the 1.3 million arrests that were done across the state over a 40-year period. And we'll have a heat map that kind of shows which communities were targeted disproportionately. Next slide. Yes, and so right now, what we're doing with the CDI, with the communities disproportionately impacted, we've cleaned approximately, so to give you some background, the state of New York tracked every single marijuana-related arrest and conviction across the state going back to 1976. My team received that data, all of that data, all those arrests in sort of like, spreadsheet form back in August. And we started cleaning that data. This could have been arrest data where, a arresting officer is just writing down someone's address on a piece of paper. That address was then put into a digital system at state government at DCJS in Albany. And some of those addresses had some mistakes. Maybe they didn't have the zip code. Maybe they got the street name wrong. And so when we first got this data and we tried to match it to a map, we only had a 60% match rate because there were that many errors in the data. And so over the course of the last 6-7 months, my team has cleaned that data. We're up to about 94% match rates now. We want to get that to about as high as possible. Oh, and for clarification on what those addresses tell you and why they're important, if someone was smoking cannabis in Central Park and they were arrested there in 1982, we wanted to know, where did they live? Where was their home address? Because that's the community that was ultimately impacted by the arrest. It wasn't Central Park that was harmed by the arrest. It was where the person lived. And what we found is predominantly the people that were arrested, 60% of them were Black, probably 20% were Hispanic. And so 80% of the arrests across the state were Black or Hispanic. And the neighborhoods they lived in were not unknown to a lot of us: South Bronx, East Brooklyn, Jamaica, Queens. And so in order for us to really ascertain which communities were harmed by prohibition, we needed those home addresses. I won't go into the training program, but the retail dispensary program, we are going to announce another 100 or so licensees awarded at our next board meeting, which will take place next Monday at Medgar Evers College. So we'll announce potentially over 100 of those licensees to add on to the 68 we've announced so far. We're very encouraged by the numbers so far. 67% of our card licensees so far are minority owned. 14% are women owned, which is unfortunate, but it's a reflection of the disproportionate arrests of men. 90% of the people who were arrested for cannabis over the last 4 years were men. 77% of the licenses we've given out so far for these retail dispensaries at one point in their lives lived in the lowest medium household incomes in the country. And I want to, kind of close with that description of, the results of the retail dispensary program, because what we're finding, what the program was intended to pull out are those individuals who, had that setback, were arrested for cannabis, maybe convicted of it, but they were still able to, rise above and start a successful, profitable business, because they had to show that they had run a profitable business before to qualify for this card license. And so it was the way it was scored and the way it was evaluated was really looking to identify the people who came from the lowest, most difficult, challenging backgrounds and succeeded at the greatest rates. So we have a lot of our initial licensees are people who, may have had that setback, but went on to be, run a successful contracting construction company or a bodega or a barbershop, or, we've even had a licensee who was a cab driver. And so it's been a really interesting cohort of licensees that have gotten these licenses. We've awarded about 20 so far in Manhattan, 15 or so in Manhattan. And we'll probably add to that next week and add another 20 licenses or so to that. Some of those individuals may be interested in opening up a dispensary in the Upper East Side, and we can kind of get to that in the Q&A. But I'll close there. That was a lot of information. I know we can get into it in the questions and answers, but hopefully we can also share this slide deck with you guys afterwards so you can review it later.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And we'll definitely integrate the slide deck into our minutes so everyone has access to the slides and can see all of the details. Sandrea, I wanted to check in with you first to see if you had, so Erica, I see your hand up, but I wanted to give Sandrea a prerogative as co-chair if she had any questions first.
Sure, thank you. Thank you both for this presentation. It was very simplified. I'm definitely going to share our YouTube and some chats and stuff and some groups because a lot of people need to know and be aware of this. I have two questions. My first one is, what is the makeup of the 13 members of the Cannabis Advisory Board? Meaning not names, but how was they chose? And all the individuals on this advisory board that has been harmed criminally by marijuana usage and or sales in the past. So I would like to know.
Yep. No, great question. So there is, much like my position and, Chris Alexander, our executive director, and the Cannabis Control Board, these are all appointed positions, and they're shared equally between between the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor's office. And so with the advisory board, I believe it was equally split between, the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor's office appointing people. And so I do know that I believe we have one or two individuals on the advisory board that were arrested for cannabis and do come from these communities. But by and large, the Cannabis Advisory Board also includes a lot of people who are public health experts in Buffalo, community development experts in Syracuse, activists in Harlem. So people who have relevant experience in other spaces, like housing, medicine, medical expertise, and so they provide that expertise to the advisory board in their other professions.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad that's someone on there. Maybe we could get a little more.
Yeah, yeah,
A little more.
I can send a link as well. Again, we will be sending a copy of the PowerPoint. I'm throwing some links in the chat as we talk, but I'll make sure that information on the Cannabis Advisory Board is also sent along with that.
Thank you so much. And my second question is, how are people being reached that have been impacted and believe they can't afford the startup? Because, you know, there's myths on the street that, you know, people are talking, I want to do it, but I can't do it. I can't do it because, you know, licensing. I heard people say license costs like $100 grand. I don't know if that's true.
No, that's not true.
Yeah, but I'm just saying these are
Yeah,
myths.
no, I know exactly what you're talking
Right,
about.
you
Yeah.
heard them, I'm sure. So it's a lot of misinformation. And how are we getting the correct information back? You know, are you, you know, is this office reaching to not just community centers, not just housing, you know, presidents and so forth, but churches, and is it in the medical? Like, how are we,
Yeah.
how is the campaign rolled out so the everyday person that think they can't can know they can if they
Yeah.
want to?
I'll give you a couple examples. So we have an external affairs team, which fills a part right now, and they're actually on a tour right now of NYCHA housing upstate, giving presentations on where we're headed with legal cannabis. My team has been to several of the NYCHA projects, as well as, you know, we've been to Brownsville, we've been to South Bronx. We've been having meetings with stakeholders for a long time. Mostly those meetings that my team was having is to actually get their feedback on how we should reach those communities. So we, for the last 6 months, spent a lot of time doing outreach in those communities with community leaders to figure out what proper channels we should be using this year as we get to roll out the wider industry to reach those populations. And so there is a lot of misinformation out there. It does not cost $100,000. It'll cost $500 actually for them to apply. But it does touch on something that's kind of, you know, important for us to acknowledge, is that, you know, I've been in the cannabis industry. I have an understanding that it is a very expensive business to get into. Part of my job's responsibility, my team's responsibility, is to ensure that people have access to the licensees, but they also have access to the business support and potentially loans, business expertise, technical training to actually operationalize those licenses. But what I am scared of, what I will always be concerned about, is I don't want to set people up to fail. I don't want to put, you know, very compliant heavy, difficult business licenses in the hands of someone who may not be prepared to actually, you know, run it yet. And so there's a lot of training and outreach that has to happen first. So what we're going to see over the next few years is that we're going to start rolling out licenses to a lot of people who are ready, and some people who aren't. But we're going to get better and better over time at providing that training, getting people ready, getting people in the industry. So we're not going to license everyone year one. This is going to take 3 to 5 years of a slow rollout, very intentional rollout, so that we are bringing those people with us as we roll out the industry, as opposed to leaving them behind. But that's an excellent question. Thank you for asking.
Thank you so much. Okay, Sari to call. Thank you. I'll yield. Thank you.
Great. I have questions too, but let's go to our community members. Erica, why don't you go first, and followed by Lori.
Thank you for the presentation. So I'm not sure which of you could answer this question. I recently met a few people who qualified for the card and have received it, but they keep getting, the OCM keeps rejecting the retail locations,
Wow.
dormitory, and they're like over a year at this point. So to me, that's an impediment in the CORD program, especially when you see that there have been 3 dispensaries opened in the East Village, all within a few blocks of each other.
Yeah, I can speak to that.
How are you going to remove that obstacle so that people who are waiting as part of this program, because what's happening now is they're being harmed again?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So we're not doing that. That is DASNY. The Dormitory Authority of New York is our partner agency on the CARD program. They are responsible for securing some of the initial locations to turnkey retail dispensaries for some of the CARD licensees. They're also trying to raise the money to actually do all 150 dispensaries. Right now, they have probably got about 10 leases in New York City. And are actively working with some CARD licensees to put them to get them located in there. But so the problem you're talking about, and this is not something that we have oversight over. This is DASNY again, but I can speak to like what they're doing. they have active lease negotiations in many parts of the city that they're trying to secure for the card program. And so what they have done is they created sort of these no-fly zones where they're in active negotiations with the landlord. If there were to be a card licensee to come in there and start negotiating with someone nearby or in the area, it could influence the price that they're negotiating with their landlord. And so in the cases where they have card licensees have submitted a property they'd like to be considered, in some cases, they're actually submitting properties to DASNY that they would like DASNY to lease for them on their behalf. In some other cases, they're submitting properties that they want to lease without DASNY's involvement. But in both cases, DASNY sometimes, because they have these no-fly zones, does reject those locations for consideration. That's kind of out of our hands. What we're trying to do is encourage our licensees who are looking for their own locations to take to look at a lot of different places. Unfortunately, this is something that is really actually being worked out as we speak. It's very complicated. I would say that the card licensees you're referring to, the earliest license that we handed out was in like early December. So most of them have only had this license for 1 or 3 months. It takes 6 to 12 months to open a dispensary, even if you have.
Right, but they've been looking because they knew they were going to apply to this, and the lists that they submitted were summarily rejected. So
I would need to know the case specifically. Maybe you can send me an email afterwards, because
I think if you reached out to your partners, you'd find that. But what you did say during your presentation was that you're trying to remove the barriers for these communities. And that's a very large barrier if somebody is anticipating this being their livelihood. And they're getting the license, and then the partners are saying consistently no to.
Yeah, we've gotten that feedback.
The locations.
We're working on it. We're working on it. I fair point. We definitely need to work on it with DASNY a little bit more.
Thank you.
Great. And Erica, I hope you follow up with Mr. Fagan on behalf of your friends, and hopefully that can help accelerate.
No, absolutely. Because I will just talk to licensees to try to understand a little bit more of the challenges that they're having, even if it's just with DASNY. Like, it might be helpful for me. I don't know who you're talking about or what their specific situation is.
I think when you reference that it's going to be like liquor licensing, that makes me very nervous, because
what do you mean?
That it's just I'm starting to hear, because I have very close family friends who are involved in it in multiple states around the country. And what I'm starting to hear now is that there's going to be multiple agencies involved with it. So from a for-profit system, whatever, those people can, they have the money to come in and plunk down money for investments. But since this meeting revolves around communities that have been historically harmed, the more separate you have the different parts of the whole, the more it harms them.
Noted.
So I've been paying attention to this since it started, because I've had my medical license as someone who lives with MS since you could. And so I've seen it rolled out, and that was not great. So, I've seen how it was rolled out in California, in Colorado, in Washington State, and they've been up and running for years. The governor said to us last year, by December 31st, there'll be 100 dispensaries up and running in the state. She said that multiple times. I'm wondering if she meant December 31st of 2098.
Hey,
no offense.
we'll definitely have 100 by then.
I went to your first OCM meeting. Like, I've logged into them many times, and I applaud the group, for the work they're doing. But it's starting to feel like every other government agency getting bogged down that's going to harm these communities again.
Yeah, well, I let me just speak to some of the card licensees and sort of the support that we have for them now. We've licensed 68 so far. We're going to open up our 8th on Friday in Schenectady. So we have our first women-owned dispensary is opening up on Thursday in Jamaica, Queens. and our 8th one is opening up in Schenectady on the 1st. We'll probably have another 10 that open in April because, as we move through the year, again, they got licensed like 6 weeks ago and 3 months ago. And the 6 to 12 month, kind of requirement to get even like the zoning, the permitting, the construction, the cash, the hiring, the insurance, it's going to take, June is when you'll see like 50 open up. And that I get that it's been really slow. It's going to accelerate over time. And then we plan to obviously license a lot more people in September and October. But yeah, this is my 7th month in government right now, and I am reminded about bureaucracy and the slowness of everything. But we are doing this intentionally in a lot of ways. We could definitely get it up and running faster if we weren't doing it equity first. There are obviously a lot of medical providers that you're familiar with that could open up stores. They could open up 50 stores overnight. They have the capital, the experience, but then they would actually dominate those markets going forward for decades. And it wouldn't be a lot of room for people to do equity afterwards. And so it's slow to start with equity, but it honors the spirit of the law. The last thing I'll say is that we have a card accelerator we just launched last week, where all of our licensees will actually be meeting one-on-one with mentors and receiving comprehensive training from people who've actually owned retail dispensaries in LA and Colorado. That only started last week, so they're going to start getting that support from experienced operators. But I hear you. It is frustrating to us internally too. We do know now that the more state government agencies you add into the mix, the slower things will probably go. So we definitely do plan on going alone going forward, probably.
Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Erica. All right, Lori, followed by Wendy, please.
Okay, thank you. And again, thank you for the presentation. It was extremely informative. Like Erica, I too have a medical marijuana license, and the last time I went to purchase something, I said to them, "Hey, when the state finally gets their dispensaries going, is this going to be like? Are you going to participate, or is it just?" The question is it going to be a hard line between like the medical marijuana dispensaries and the commercial, the other,
Yep.
dispensaries, or are they just all going to combine and be under one authority?
Mm. Oh, yeah. So great question. No, they will be separate. And they will be separate for a lot of reasons. One is tax purposes. The medical cannabis products is taxed at a much lower rate. We actually are trying right now to repeal the medical cannabis tax because it's medicine. Patients shouldn't be paying tax to access medicine. As well as, the cannabis companies that you've been purchasing medical cannabis from, they will also be moving into the adult use recreational market at some point soon. They are the only ones who will be able to co-locate. 2 of their medical locations will also be able to be adult use recreational locations. So they may have 2 separate counters that you would go to purchase cannabis products, but that's the only place in the industry that you'll see them in the same location. Otherwise, they'll be completely distinct and separate.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I'll also add that one of the good things they put in the cannabis law is they created a medical cannabis prioritization plan. So all the medical cannabis providers, they can't just start growing only recreational adult use cannabis. They have to prioritize some of their production and their products for the medical cannabis program.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. Wendy?
Hi, thank you so much. And thank you for a really wonderful and thorough presentation. I have a question about the arrests because I'm old enough to remember the inception of the Rockefeller drug law in 1973. You mentioned going back and expunging the records of people who were convicted from 1976. And I'm sure that's really the economic bulk. I mean, so many people were arrested and incarcerated under that law. Are you looking to go back completely? Is there a limit what you're looking? And what about people who may have been convicted in other states and have moved here afterwards, who may also be eligible otherwise to open a dispensary?
Yeah. So I think I said that 78 number because that's how far back our data goes on the arrests. all cannabis convictions were expunged statewide. So going back however long they were actually convicting people of cannabis-related, marijuana-related crimes, those were expunged. Our data that on the arrests, on who was arrested, their race, ethnicity, their age, home address, that only started in 1976. So that's how far back our data goes.
Excellent.
As far as the other marijuana arrests from outside of the state, it's a very interesting question because it's actually one of the reasons that we're unable to license retail locations right now in Brooklyn. As some of you may know, there's a lawsuit currently ongoing that is, and the judge issued an injunction on 5 of the areas that we wanted to issue retail dispensary licenses. That lawsuit is primarily backed by larger corporations who don't want us to be doing this equity focused rollout. But it's the person suing us was arrested for marijuana in Michigan, and their point is that I was arrested in Michigan, you can't not discriminate against the fact that I was arrested in Michigan for your program. You can't prioritize the New York State. The folks who got arrested in New York State, it violates the Interstate Commerce Clause, the Dormant Commerce Clause. So that's being argued right now with our office and the Attorney General's office in court. But one of the things that's really interesting about the lawsuit, and that we expect to receive more lawsuits like it that claim that we're prioritizing, we're discriminating against out-of-staters by prioritizing people who were arrested in New York, who received New York State marijuana arrests. That's what the law says. The law says only contains information about those penal codes, those criminal codes, New York State arrests. You mentioned the Rockefeller drug laws. Stop and frisk as well. These things were very unique in New York. New York was the marijuana arrest capital of the world for decades. So the experiences people had, getting arrested for marijuana in other states, while very bad, paled in comparison to the scale of the damage that was done here and the way it was inflicted on certain communities. And so we expect that argument really demonstrates a need for us and for the cannabis law to prioritize those individuals who were arrested here, because many of them, as a result of a simple stop and frisk, could have resulted in 3 years in prison under the Rockefeller drug laws, which wasn't the case in places like Vermont or Colorado or Washington, where they had much more lax cannabis drug laws. And the last thing I'll say is, what am I blanking on? New York arrested 1.3 million people over a 40-year period. A lot of those individuals don't live here anymore, or maybe didn't even live here, or maybe they were visiting. So there are, a lot of non-New Yorkers who are also eligible for these benefits because, they came here for Christmas and they got arrested in the park or something. And we're finding that, a lot of even our initial license applications, they own businesses in Seattle, in LA. They were arrested here in the 80s and since left.
I have one follow-up question about the
Sure.
Currently unlicensed stores. And actually, this came up in Williamsburg yesterday, that there are people who are quite upset about the unlicensed retail establishments, people who live in Williamsburg. And in case anybody is curious, there are walking tours that are on YouTube, very relaxing to watch and happy making on a lovely day. And in the comments that came up as the person who was doing the tour passed several of these shops. And I know this isn't in your jurisdiction, but if those owners do come to you subsequently, are they frowned upon more than, I don't know what the right term is, innocent applicants?
Yes.
They're frowned upon more because they, even though perhaps they were from a disadvantaged group in the past themselves, took the initiative, are paying rent, giving jobs.
Yeah.
What are the justice considerations that might come into play? I know that's a bit speculative, but what might come into play?
No, it's a great question.
Those needs?
So we, starting last year, when these stores started popping up, we were very public saying that you have to shut these stores down. We're going to send you a warning. We sent cease and desist letters. Those operators, those stores that, a lot of them did shut down when we told them, essentially what we told them is that if you don't cease and desist, you will not be eligible for a legal cannabis license. Because you're jumping the line. There are people who are waiting to apply for these licenses, and you're cheating the system. You're taking advantage of a loophole. Those individuals who received our cease and desist letters, and we noted down their address, the landlord, the location, the people who ran that store. If they didn't adhere to our requests, they are on a permanent list where they will not be eligible for cannabis licensing. It's unfortunate, and we've tried, and we've been working a lot with the city on this, with Dashita Dawson, the New York City Cannabis Czar, and the New York City Sheriff's Office, to give people the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they didn't know that this is illegal. Maybe they thought that maybe they, made a mistake and they read something wrong. So we go to them directly and say, like, this is illegal. You cannot do this. These are untested, unsafe products. You don't even know where they're from. There's a public health concern. In the case of the place I'm talking about on the Upper East Side over on 64th Street, it's half a block from the high school there. So that's already in violation of our laws. And so if those places cease to, don't shut down after we've, had that conversation with them, they are added to a list and they will be ineligible for applying for a legal license.
Thank you for the thoughtful answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
I would just finish with two quick points. One, it was October 21st of 2021 during the second board meeting where this issue actually came up and was discussed. Both Chair Wright and Executive Director Chris Alexander talked about these stores, the brick and mortar stores. It's been an issue that we have been grappling with almost literally since the first board meeting that we've had. It's I mentioned in the PowerPoint, we are working with state legislative and executive branch, the governor, on expanding our power in a bill. Once we have this bill locked in, we will absolutely send this around to all community boards so you're aware of what's going on with it. It's going to expand our power, our influence over the illicit brick and mortar sites. And I think you will see a night and day difference once this legislation is passed. But as Damien said, this has been going on and we've been aware of it. And we've been sending cease and desist letters since the second board meeting, trying to explain to people that they're out of line doing this. So,
and the one thing I'll add to Phil's comment, this is actually currently being negotiated as we speak in Albany. And what I've done is what I've tried to do is, especially with community boards, if you think that the state should be taking more action against these illicit shops, please write your assembly person, your state senator, your representatives, and let them know, because there are elements of what we want to do that some people are opposed to, particularly landlords. There are some elements of what we want to do that will actually focus on the landlords, because otherwise it's a perpetual game of whack-a-mole. They're just moving from location to location. And the next time you see an illicit shop, note the building that it's in. I've seen, at least on the Upper East Side, a lot of the ones that have opened up with illicit shops, there hasn't been a business in those stores in a long time. Maybe the landlord hasn't been paying attention to it for a while, or the rent is too high, or they just haven't been able to attract some other businesses there. And so they're kind of taking this route because it's easy, quick cash. It's opportunism, and we need to get smarter about shutting these places down and really going after the structures that allow them to exist in the first place. Their whole program I've described to you, this equity rollout, these licenses, that are going to be held by nonprofits like the Doe Fund and Housing Works and others who are just as impacted. It doesn't work if right down the street someone can start selling cannabis products from California without paying tax. They just won't be able to compete, and we will never actually have an equitable and safe and secure cannabis industry if these shops are in existence. So.
Great. Thank you. Do we have any other questions? If not, I'll ask my question. Super. So it's really helpful to know that that with licensed businesses, we're reinvesting back in New York when they're patronized, when they're supported, and it gives us as a community even more of a reason to make sure that the dispensaries and the on-site use consumption licenses are going to people who are following the regulations and the law that are being set by the state. And not to call you out, but we have Harley here from Assemblymember C. Wright's office. And so I know Harley's taking good notes, because just a block away from your office, Harley, is one of the illicit shops that folks have been worried about. And so it's really exciting to hear that our schools will benefit from this, that public health initiatives and impacted communities will see the benefits of the OCM program. And I was wondering, first, when will the first disbursements happen? So we can help notify communities and frankly notify, our schools will know about it, but I think it'll be helpful for families to know that this money is being reinvested into our schools. And my second question is, have any other states gone to you for guidance on how they might be able to implement equity programs in their states?
Yeah, great questions. The state question is interesting because it actually has been coming up a lot recently. Minnesota is about to legalize cannabis in the exact same way we did. And I've been talking to their legislators and regulators for a few months now, and a bunch of activists up there. They've essentially copied our law and are actually, instead of 50%, they made it a 60% licensing goal so they can be the most equitable state in the country. If they do pass that law, they will be. So kudos to them. Hawaii is another state that we've talked to a lot that is looking at doing it similarly to the way we're doing it. That is something with a social equity focus, that's very small business, mom and pop friendly. And I actually wanted to say this earlier and I didn't. One of the ways to think about a cannabis dispensary and how we're building it that's very different from other states is your local wine shop. So when you guys go into your local Upper East Side wine shop, you'll notice that there's just a million different options. The people there are, usually pretty helpful to actually find the kind of wine that you're looking for. That's kind of where we're headed towards with cannabis. As people, the stores will be very consumer focused. They'll have a lot of options. They'll have friendly staff that try to help people find what they're looking for. What was the first question again? I'm sorry. It was the reinvestment, the disbursement. Next year is going to be the first disbursement for the community reinvestment grants and the tax money. Obviously, sales have been starting throughout the year. Housing Works and Union Square Travel Agency are down in downtown, as well as Smacked. These all have been generating tax revenue as they've been selling cannabis. So this year is the first year of us starting to generate real revenue that will go into that program. And so we're hoping to have millions of dollars available for the reinvestment money to start next year. But that's going to be below 10 million probably. Subsequent years, hundreds of millions of dollars.
Great. Yeah, I love the what you mentioned about how medical bills, purchasing apartments, that there could be direct benefits to people in the communities that will have a immediate impact on their lives.
Yep. And I think the way we want to structure it too is where the communities themselves they're drafting the projects they want and they're submitting them for the grant money, as opposed to the state coming up with their own ideas. Let the communities decide how they want to spend the money and submit their proposals to the community advisory board.
Rita, I see your hand is up.
My background is advertising, and I work for RJ Reynolds as a client. So with the cannabis, are you planning on having a disclaimer about the ills of smoking or the health hazards of smoking?
Yeah. So I think Phil might be able to speak a little more specifically to this, but all of our packaging is, one, child safe, so children can't open it. Two, it has, I think, poison control contact information on it. It's got public health information there about inhaling, consuming. We're also investing heavily in consumer education campaigns to let people know what is a safe amount of milligram dosage to start with. Teaching them about how to secure your cannabis products safely in your home and secure storage away from children. But Phil, do you know anything else about the labels on the actual products themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I can throw in some links here to our to the packaging labeling regs themselves. I just threw one in, but I can also send try to get it in the chat, but certainly send it in a follow-up email. Well, we have pictures, specific pictures of what the labeling looks like. We tried to make it kind of universal. There's a few campaigns that really follow what we're doing regulatory and at a regulatory manner, with making sure the general public understands where we're headed and what we're doing. So we're going to be heading into a new campaign called Why Buy Legal, where we'll list out the benefits of a legalized market, the fact that it's fully tested, that you know exactly what you're getting. You can receive assistance within that dispensary as well. And making sure that people have a full understanding of what to look for to distinguish between illegal and illicit packaging. Ours will be very straightforward. You will know that it's coming from New York. There are a few different symbols on there. You'll also be able to get the testing outcome or an analysis.
The lab results, yeah.
Lab results as well. So you're going to be able to see the batch that was tested that you're currently purchasing. You usually have to follow a QR code and it brings you to the results. So it's certainly a robust program, and it's really geared towards learning the mistakes of the tobacco company, what they were able to get away with for decades, and make sure that we prevent that from happening in the cannabis ecosystem and learn from all those mistakes previously. So
yeah, and I'll add to that, because I know the smoke is a problem for a lot of New Yorkers right now. And one of the reasons so many cannabis consumers are smoking publicly is because that's the lowest form of consumption. I mean, it's the cheapest, it's the most available. As we legalize and our market matures, there will be much more, less smelly ways to consume cannabis. Beverages, Housing Works that now has canned THC beverages. We'll have a lot more edibles and vapes available to consumers, so they don't have to just smoke. And yeah.
Great. So I just want to recognize the time. Damien, we originally talked about an hour and you've extended your time. And so I'm grateful to you and Philip for making time for us, and also want to make sure that you guys can go home.
Yeah, I'm good. I can answer another question. I mean, I have till 8. That's what I signed up for. So.
And so I see Erica's hand up, but I also want to make sure that, sorry, Sandrea.
I'm sorry. I wanted to just, before we go into the next question, many do not know that pharmacists are in the dispensaries for the municipal, marijuana. Will that be also put out in the atmosphere from you all? Because many do not know that.
Yeah, it's a requirement for our medical dispensaries to have pharmacists on staff. That won't be replicated in the adult use, the recreational industry, but are you saying that people don't know about that?
A lot of people don't. They're not aware.
Yeah. No, we need to do a better job of promoting our medical program, is something that we're realizing. A lot of the feedback we've gotten from especially medical patients is that there just needs to be more broadcasting of where these dispensaries are. Part of the MRTA actually also mandates that we issue 5 more licenses for registered organizations for medical cannabis providers. And what's exciting about that is that now that the industry is kind of more mature and developed, there are a lot of public health providers, a lot of medical providers that aren't in the cannabis space in New York that want to go after those licenses. So they actually want a cannabis registered organization license to do medical cannabis, not to go into the adult use market, not to do the other things, to actually incorporate cannabis into their medical practice. And so we're going to actually do some work this year to make sure that more New Yorkers know about the medical program and expand it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That'll be good, because some people that might have to start for their pain or whatever it is, and they're skeptical because they don't know what to walk in, and they don't know the procedure, and to know that someone's there to help guide you, that would be very helpful.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you. Sarah, back to you.
Thank you. I'm feverishly taking notes. I see Erica's hand is up. I just wanted to check. that, is there anyone else who hasn't asked a question yet before we go to Erica? All right, Erica, take it away. And I think this will be our last question for tonight, and we can let Davian and Philip go.
What I would love, I guess, for people to stop doing at this point is pretending that this isn't medicine that's been around for thousands of years and in many people's homes. I grew up with it in my home. So when you talk about, all of the, I fully support putting, the big things about smoking on it, because as I went to Europe, I started going to Europe as a kid, they had that all over their cigarette packaging there, and I never understood why it wasn't here. So I fully support that. But I also think that a lot of times agencies tend to shoot for perfect when good, because booze is in people's homes with children. Cannabis has been in people's homes with children since the dawn of time. It's hard for me to throw a stone. So I would just caution spending millions and millions of dollars, beyond those warnings in terms of smoking and, what drugs can do to your system. Because I see this in the industry I work in. I work in healthcare. I work in the pharmaceutical industry. And the money that is spent on things that really just aren't needed, it allows perfect to get in the way of good. So I would say safety is important, but just remember, most of the people that have gotten for medical cannabis and are now in the adult market have been using it for many, many years.
Yeah. Point taken, Erica.
So let's just kind of be realistic about what this is.
Yeah. No, I think you hit it.
My hope.
The nail on the head. I've heard that from a lot of medical cannabis consumers. I think in the context of New York, what we're running into is there's still a lot of stigma, and there's still a lot of people who don't understand the plant that well. And we have to. Yeah.
It has helped what's helped for me, the game changer for medical was knowing the doses that help my symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
That was, because if I make it at home, it's anybody's guess.
Yeah.
But it's really knowing the doses, which has been really helpful. But to your point, the rollout of medical was a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to see it happen regardless of who the community is or what community is. I have hope. You sound amazing, and you've been really great in your presentation, more than anybody else I've seen so far come out of the OCM. So I really, really appreciate it. But let's try to get the people that have been harmed up and running as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I am going to throw it over to Sandrea to close us out today, and just want to express our deep gratitude to Davian and Philip for your presentation today, for all the care and the hard work that you have done in getting this program going. It's tremendous. And I'll hand it over to you, Sandrea.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for showing up. Thank you for the presenters. You did an excellent job, as I said earlier. And I will be sharing this, our YouTube, so we're going to have some numbers. Not that we're about numbers, but this is that informative that this needs to go out, and hopefully people will be reaching out to you all too. So thanks again. Thanks, Sarah, co-chair extraordinaire. Any old business? Any new business? Okay, one quick announcement. Our next virtual Social Justice Committee meeting will be on Monday, April 24th for this year at 6:30 p.m. We will have a discussion with representation from the New York Civil Liberties Union to discuss the NYPD's Strategic Response Group. Please join us. Motion to close. Erica, and Rita. Okay, thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thank you very
Everybody,
much.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for having me.
Robert, also, thanks.